They told you 157 people vanished, but they never showed you the coffins because they weren't meant for the dead. They were containers, sealed to keep something in, not out. And if you're still watching, you're already part of it. No one finds this by accident. They were either marked long ago or they finally looked too deep. 12 coffins, 13 nights, one town that remembers. And if you make it to the end, you won't leave with answers. You'll leave with them. They told you the coffins were full. They told you the souls were at peace, but they lied. And now you're going to know why. Behind the church, past the rotting fence, 157 graves rested in silence, each one marked, each one sealed, each one trusted. Then the first coffin was opened. Winter of 1879, no body, no bones, just stones, cold, heavy, deliberate, every coffin the same, no flesh, no death, just the illusion of burial. The town didn't ask, the church didn't question, the papers were signed, the insurance paid out, and the truth stayed buried. You've never heard of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. That's no accident. It was erased because what happened here wasn't grief, it was profit. What happened here wasn't mourning, it was design. This was a system built inside a church, run by a man who didn't serve God. He served something else. Reverend Marcus Thompson, tall, respected, trusted, and behind his voice was something much colder than faith. He didn't save people, he harvested them. The ones who vanished weren't buried, they were used, moved through tunnels, passed through hands, forgotten on purpose. This isn't about ghosts, it's about a ritual, a pattern, a hidden mechanism that still runs beneath cities, beneath churches, beneath everything. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll never trust a eulogy again. We begin with empty graves and end with the truth. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story, it's a key. And the door it opens can never be closed again. Millbrook wasn't just a mining town, it was a pressure cooker, built on black dust and silent desperation, 1,000 men digging their own lungs into the grave, and 1,000 more praying the next shift wouldn't be their last. Families held together by candlelight, bread won by blood, and churches that promised salvation if you could just survive one more week. St. Stephen's stood like a lighthouse, but its light didn't guide, it blinded. The Reverend came when the town needed hope, and he offered it. Cheap, clean, holy insurance. That was his miracle. He stood at the pulpit, spoke of widows and orphans, of preparing for tomorrow, of dignity in death, and he made it sound righteous, sound like it came straight from heaven's gate. 50 cents a month, that's all it cost to protect your family, to guarantee the future, and people believed him because grief is loud and logic gets quiet when you're burying your children. Within 6 months, 200 families had signed away their futures. Paperwork was handled by Thompson himself. Payouts were fast. Bodies buried fast. No delays, no investigations. But behind that speed was a machine, a silent system of fake death certificates, cooperative doctors, and empty caskets. It didn't take long for the bodies to disappear because the town was already used to losing people. Cave-ins, fires, lung rot. Accidents were common. Nobody questioned another death, nobody had the energy, and that's what he counted on. Exhaustion, silence, faith. He used the church as a front, the insurance as bait, and grief as his cover. The town never stood a chance. What do you call a place where the people vanish, but the coffins keep filling up, where prayers echo over hollow graves, where every sermon is part of a con? You call it sacred, you call it tradition, you call it God, but it was a farm, and the harvest was human. You want to understand darkness, you start with the lies that felt like kindness, because that's how evil moves, not with a scream, but with a hymn. And the scariest part, it worked so well. They didn't just let it happen, they thanked him for it. The people trusted him, because they had to. In a place like Millbrook, Trust wasn't optional, it was survival. There weren't hospitals, there weren't watchdogs, there weren't government men checking ledgers or questioning causes of death. There was just the church, the doctor, the undertaker, and all three were connected, perfectly, quietly, permanently. Thompson ran the front, with sermons soaked in scripture, with eyes that shimmered when he spoke of eternity. He had a way of making loss feel beautiful. He told them suffering was part of the divine plan, that grief meant your love was real, that every tear drew you closer to heaven. Behind him stood Dr. Whitman, young, brilliant, a recent graduate who wanted to make his name, and what better way to build a reputation than by aligning with a man who could bring you patience and protection and power. Whitman wrote the death certificates, always clean, always credible. Chest pains, lung failure, fever, mining injury, things no one would question, especially not grieving families who had just lost everything. And then there was Samuel Crowe, the undertaker, quiet, measured, invisible. He handled the boxes, he handled the burials, and he never asked what was inside. 3 men, 1 system, and not a single soul around them dared to ask questions, because when the funeral comes fast, when the money arrives early, when the preacher cries at your door, you don't see the trap, you thank him for the rope. It was efficient, it was elegant, and it was evil, and over time it became tradition. That's the part most people don't understand. Evil doesn't survive by hiding in shadows. It survives by putting on a collar, by folding its hands, by quoting scripture while it feeds. By the 3rd year, the coffins kept coming. More deaths, more policies, more payouts. But something else started to happen, something that couldn't be explained away. People began seeing the dead, not in dreams, not in grief, but walking, breathing, moving through the fog like nothing had happened. A husband seen in another town, a child staring through a window, a friend buying bread 2 weeks after his own burial, and every time they disappeared before anyone could speak to them, like shadows, like ghosts. But this wasn't haunting, it was relocation. The dead weren't dead, they had been taken, and those sightings were the cracks in the perfect illusion, the cracks Reverend Thompson couldn't stop. It started slow, a glimpse in the fog, a face in the window, a voice in the market that sounded too familiar. James Morrison was the first, a miner, a father, buried 3 weeks earlier in the churchyard, a closed casket, a heartfelt sermon, tears and silence. And then one bitter February morning he was seen again, walking the train tracks just outside Millbrook, thin, pale, moving with the same limp he had in life. No mistake. Thomas McKenna saw him, called his name, but the figure never turned, just kept walking, and disappeared into the trees. McKenna told no one. Would you? He had stood at the funeral, he had seen the coffin lowered, he had heard the hymns, and yet there he was, alive, moving, breathing. So he buried it like everyone did back then. Pushed it down, called it grief, blamed the coal dust in his lungs and moved on. But he wasn't the only one. Mary O'Sullivan saw her dead husband in a neighbouring town buying salt, as if nothing had happened. Agnes Fletcher saw her son staring into her kitchen window, skin tight on his bones, but unmistakable, always distant, always silent, always gone before anyone could reach them. And Reverend Thompson, he knew just what to say. Grief plays tricks, the mind conjures what the heart can't let go. They're not ghosts, they're not demons, they're memories. He said it with conviction, with a tone only a man of God could carry, and it worked. People nodded, people prayed, people stayed quiet because they needed to believe that their loved ones were resting in peace, not wandering the edges of reality like shadows in exile. But there's a limit to how long you can ignore the cracks. Too many sightings, too many whispers, too many moments when the dead refused to stay dead. It wasn't just trauma, it wasn't coincidence, it wasn't the imagination of coal-worn minds. It was evidence, that something beneath Millbrook was moving people like pieces, taking them, hiding them, you see, nung them. And it all came back to those empty coffins, sealed with stone, weighted to perfection, burying not bodies, but secrets, secrets Reverend Thompson was willing to kill for. By 1870, the deaths weren't random anymore. They were rhythmic, always spaced, just right, never too many at once, never enough to raise alarms, like someone was watching a clock, like the deaths had to happen on schedule, like it was part of a ritual. Every few weeks, another member of the congregation would fall. Chest pain, mining injury, sudden fever. Always something believable, always something common, and the coffins kept coming. Pine boxes, cheap handles, same dimensions, same weight, different names. Inside, always the same. Stones wrapped in cloth, arranged to feel like a body. Nobody questioned it because nobody saw it. Only 3 men ever touched the dead, the Reverend, the Doctor, the Undertaker, and they worked like gears in a single machine. No questions, no hesitation, no daylight. The policies kept getting signed. The payouts kept coming. Widows wept. Children prayed. And behind it all, the church grew quiet and rich. That's the thing about systems built on silence. They don't collapse with noise. They rot quietly. From the inside, it wasn't just about money. It was never just about money. It was about access, control, transformation. People weren't being killed. They were being repurposed. For what? No one knew, but the patterns were too perfect to ignore. Men with no close family, women who lived alone, elderly with no property, the isolated, the forgotten, the expendable, and every time a new policy, a new grave, a new weight of stone. But the bodies gone, always gone, and slowly the town began to feel it, that tension in the air, that shiver at the edge of your spine, the feeling that something was feeding. The church bells sounded the same, but their meaning had changed. They weren't calling people to worship. They were marking the next offering. Each ring another sacrifice, wrapped in ritual, sealed in wood, lowered into earth, but never laid to rest. Millbrook wasn't just dying, it was being harvested. And Reverend Thompson, he wasn't just a man anymore, he was a gatekeeper, a conductor, channeling the town's pain into something deeper, something ancient, something organized, and the scariest part, the people still believed he was saving them. It always starts with the ledger, ink on paper, neat handwriting, unquestioned signatures, because evil doesn't just live in shadows, it lives in records, it lives in paperwork that nobody bothers to read. And one day, someone did. Her name was Clara Norridge, 26 years old, a schoolteacher, quiet, precise, too smart for a town that wanted women silent. She wasn't supposed to see the church accounts, but after the parish secretary fell ill, she was asked to help just for a week, just to keep things running. What she found didn't make sense. Payouts listed for people she knew were still alive, dates that didn't match burials, insurance checks issued weeks before someone died. At first, she thought it was error, simple mistakes. Maybe grief had confused the paperwork, but the more she looked, the worse it got. Some names appeared twice. Some deaths were never announced. Some people listed as dead were still walking the streets of Millbrook. She went to Reverend Thompson, showed him the discrepancies, and his smile never wavered. "My child, these are clerical issues, errors in filing. We will correct them." She wanted to believe him. Everyone did, because his voice carried the weight of faith, and faith is louder than fear. But she couldn't let it go. She copied the records, took them home, laid them out. Page after page, a pattern began to form. People with no next of kin, no property, no debt. One by one, they disappeared. A check was issued. A coffin was buried. A funeral was held. But no one ever saw the body. She went to the county office, asked for coroner's reports, asked for burial permits, and found nothing. No oversight, no inspection, no second opinions. Every death certified by one man, Dr. Whitman, every burial handled by one man. Samuel Crowe. It was a closed circuit, a locked room, a perfect loop. She knew what it meant, she knew what she had uncovered, and that night she didn't sleep, because when you
discover a machine this dark, you don't just fear the men who run it, you fear what they're feeding. The next morning, Clara Norridge vanished, her belongings still in her room, her notes gone, the pages burned in the schoolhouse stove. The official story, she moved to Philadelphia, but the people of Millbrook never saw her again. And 1 week later, a new grave appeared behind the church. No name, no marker, just fresh soil and silence.
After Clara vanished, something shifted in Millbrook. Not with sound, but with silence. You ever notice how a town can feel different? Without anything visibly changing, the air felt thicker, the shadows lasted longer, and no one said her name, not even in whispers. It was like she had been plucked from memory, erased from existence, as if the town had learned what happens when you look too close, and worse, accepted it. The townspeople started walking different, eyes lower, voices softer. No one asked questions anymore. The church kept ringing, the coffins kept coming, and the machine, it kept humming just beneath the surface. But the sickness wasn't just physical, it was psychological. People forgot what they saw, what they felt, what they feared. Old friends didn't recognize each other. Children forgot their teachers. Widows forgot their husbands' last words. It was as if Millbrook was unraveling from the inside. Memory by memory. You don't need chains when the mind forgets. You don't need prisons when people doubt their own reality. And that was the brilliance of Reverend Thompson's true doctrine. It wasn't just sermons, it was control built on ritual, repetition, and something far older than scripture buried under the altar. There were documents, too old to be local, handwritten in ink that shimmered under firelight, not English, not Latin, but something that twisted the tongue when read aloud. It called itself the rite of withdrawal. Not a religion, a method, a way to excise pain, but the pain had to be converted, had to be harvested, through grief, through confusion, through loss. Each false coffin, each fake funeral was part of that harvest, not of souls, but of memory, because when a town forgets, it becomes pliable, it becomes quiet, it becomes obedient. You don't need fear when you erase the ability to remember, and behind every page of the rite there was a spiral drawn in blood, copied again and again, etched into pews, carved beneath headstones, hidden in plain sight, a shape that pulled the eye, bent the mind, made thoughts skip like broken records. The spiral wasn't just a symbol, it was a map, a way inward into forgetting, into silence, and by the end of 1872, Millbrook had forgotten. 73 people erased without fire, without gunfire, without war, just the slow drip of belief and the careful hand of a man who knew that memory was the final battleground.
The altar was never just wood, never just stone. It was a lid, and underneath it a room, but not a basement, not a cellar, no stairs, no blueprints, just a hatch, hidden beneath the altar cloth, only opened on nights when the moon was gone. When the bells rang once, and no more, they called it the Chamber of Recitation. No one remembers building it, no one ever mentioned it in records, but it was there, silent, hungry, and too precise to be old, too primitive to be new. 4 walls, circular, no corners, no exit. The spiral was carved into the floor, not drawn, carved. Each groove filled with ash, old ash, flesh ash, the kind you don't sweep, the kind that sticks to the skin, and on the walls were names. Not written, not painted, scratched in, fingernails, knives, bones, anything sharp enough to leave proof that someone existed before they were erased. And in the centre, a stone seat, like a throne, but too small, child-sized, designed not for comfort, but for containment. It was always cold, even in summer, even when the world burned above. This was where the right was spoken, and no one ever spoke it alone. They said the voices came from the walls, from the spiral itself. Not loud, not screaming, just murmuring, like memory being chewed. Reverend Thompson didn't recite the rite. He listened to it, and repeated what he heard, because the rite was never meant for the living. It was meant to feed something older, something embedded in the spiral, a presence without shape, without name, but not without appetite. And each recitation, each false funeral, each erased name was another offering, another fracture in the wall between thought and silence, another piece of Millbrook slipping into obedience. But what made the chamber most terrifying wasn't the spiral, or the ash, or the voices. It was the mirror, a round, rusted mirror, bolted to the far wall, that didn't reflect what stood before it. It reflected what was forgotten.
The first man to fight it wasn't a priest, wasn't a scholar. He was the gravedigger, name lost, like the others. But they called him Morrow, old Morrow. He worked alone, always had, said the earth spoke to him, warned him where not to dig. And he listened, until the day they told him to bury a coffin, with no body. He asked who'd died. They wouldn't say. He asked why it was empty. They told him it wasn't his place to ask. That night, he opened the coffin. There was no lining, no fabric, just carved words inside, words that pulsed like wounds, still bleeding through wood. He didn't understand them, but they echoed in his skull, over and over, until his dreams became hollow. Morrow stopped sleeping, started writing, not letters, not sentences, symbols, spirals, not just on paper, but on walls, on his skin, on the bark of the oak tree near the cemetery gate. They tried to stop him. Reverend Thompson sent men, said he was sick, said he needed cleansing. But when they got to his shack, they found it empty, except for one thing, a map drawn in dirt and soot, leading from the altar, past the graves, deep into the woods. At the center, a spiral bigger than any before, surrounded by names, but not just the missing, the living too. People who still walked the streets, smiled, prayed, worked the stores, all of them marked, as if already erased. Just waiting to catch up, the townsfolk burned the map, burned the shack, buried his name under silence. But the spiral stayed, etched into the ground behind the altar, where the soil never grew back, where birds never landed, where no snow ever stayed, a dead spot, in a town already half dead. Morrow tried to remember, but the town made sure he wouldn't. He was last seen at the edge of town, hands trembling, eyes black with sleeplessness, whispering into the trees. They said his last words were not words, but sounds, backward syllables, tongue cracking, trying to speak the name of the thief. The town never held festivals, never held dances, never celebrated births, not even weddings, but every year, on the 13th night of winter, they gathered at the church. No bells rang, no music played, no candles lit. It was called the rejoining. No one explained it, no one invited you, you simply knew. And if you tried to leave Millbrook that day, the roads bent, the signs reversed, your car stalled, or worse, you stayed, even if you didn't want to. The air was thick with fog, the kind that smells like ash and iron, that clings to your bones, like guilt. They wore black, all of them, even the children, especially the children, and they walked not in rows, not in a line, but in a spiral around the church, tighter and tighter, each step a heartbeat, each step a chant, no words, just breath. A rhythm older than language, older than grief. At the center stood Reverend Thompson, face veiled, hands folded, mouth shut. He held no scripture, only a mirror, round, cracked, flecked with blood. He turned it slowly, so every person saw their reflection, but no one looked like themselves. Their faces, distorted, missing pieces, eyes gone, mouths stitched, some even reflected as children, others as corpses. And then the wind stopped, not slowed, stopped, as if the world took a breath and chose not to release it. The mirror fell, but did not shatter. It sank into the altar, like water, and from that mirror a hand emerged. It wasn't human, too long, too thin, bending in ways flesh should not. It touched the altar, and the wood blackened. Another hand followed, then a shoulder, then a face. No eyes, just holes, where eyes had once been, and from its open mouth came a voice that was not a voice, not sound, but memory. Everyone heard something different. Some heard their own birth, others their own funeral. Some heard screams they never remembered making, or lullabies sung by voices they swore were gone. One boy heard his mother call he. The light from the spiral wasn't light. It was memory, pulled out of the ground, dragged from the walls, ripped from the eyes of the living. People began to cry, but they didn't know why. Some dropped to their knees, whispering names, not their own. One man screamed, not in pain, but like a choir of voices screaming through him, echoes trapped in his rib cage, finally breaking free. Then the first death happened, but not like you'd expect. No blood, no wounds, just a collapse. A woman folded in on herself, like a piece of paper burning from the inside, her skin shriveled, her bones cracked, and when she hit the ground, there was nothing left but hair. No one moved. They didn't mourn her. They didn't even blink because they remembered something they were never supposed to remember, that this had happened before, not once, but many times, each rejoining, another soul removed, another memory rewritten, another part of the town erased. But this time the erasure was imperfect. This time the spiral remembered too much. The cracks had grown, in the ground, in the air, in their minds. Second death came quickly. A child, 11 maybe, stared into the spiral and smiled. Then his head turned too far, way too far. Snapping like paper in the wind, he fell forward, face calm, eyes wide open, as if he saw something beautiful. Right before he vanished, gone. Not even dust left behind. The townsfolk didn't run. They couldn't. Their legs forgot how to move. Their mouths forgot how to scream. Some tried, but the sounds came out wrong, like tape rewinding, like insects crawling through radios, like a language that should never be spoken aloud. And all the while, that thing kept pulling itself from the mirror. Its spine was visible, but not bone, like cords or roots or memory made physical. Every part of it moved wrong, like it was mimicking a human, but doing it through a broken lens. And its mouth never stopped opening. At 3 a.m., the church bell rang 13 times, but the town didn't have a bell anymore, hadn't for years. It was torn down in a fire. The kind no one remembered starting, the kind that burned cold, yet the sound rang out, clear, perfect, like time itself had snapped back to repeat the moment. And with each toll the town shifted, windows moved, streets bent ever so slightly, mailboxes reversed numbers, signs rewrote themselves, and the people, they began to forget their own names, not all at once, just one letter at a time. Marcy became Marnie, then Mardy, then someone else entirely. Children called parents by the wrong names. Husbands stared at wives and didn't recognize them. Memories collided like waves, until nothing held shape. One man ran into the square, holding a wedding photo, crying, because the woman next to him in the picture didn't exist anymore. He swore she was real, swore they lived together, loved each other, buried a dog named Truman in the backyard. But his house was different now, smaller, colder, no dog, no wife, no door where he remembered it. The spiral was working, not fast, not loud, but perfectly. Like a surgeon cutting away unwanted memory, and the more it erased, the more it fed. The thing inside the mirror was no longer just a shape. It had form, it had weight. It had a voice now. It didn't speak words, it hummed a low ancient frequency, like the vibration of a tuning fork made from human bone. Every time it hummed, something disappeared. A barn, a street, a family line, gone from history, gone from memory, gone from existence, and no one fought it. Because no one remembered they were supposed to. Some knelt in front of it like pilgrims, like worshippers. They didn't cry, they didn't pray. They just watched it. as if it was beautiful, as if it was holy, because for them it was. The spiral had shown them something ancient, something buried beneath the bones of time, that everything.
They knew everything they loved, everything they feared, was built on a lie. And now the truth was returning, one erased name at a time.
By morning, some tried to run, not because they remembered what they saw, but because they felt something deep in their stomach, a twisting, gnawing, gut-level instinct that something had shifted, a wrongness in the air, like breathing in a memory that never belonged to you. They packed their cars, grabbed children who no longer knew their own last names, locked their homes, which no longer had keys, and fled. But the roads had changed. Highway 9 now circled back into Millbrook. No matter the direction, no matter the speed, no matter how long you drove, one man drove for 4 straight hours, never stopping, only to return to the same gas station with the same woman behind the counter, still pouring coffee that never steamed. He asked her what time it was. She blinked, then said, "What year?" Another woman tried to walk out through the forest. She followed a compass, kept due south, marked trees with red tape, but after 3 miles she emerged onto Main Street, her shoes muddy, her eyes shaking, the red tape still fluttering from the lamppost behind her. They weren't roads anymore, not really. They were thoughts, paths carved in the brain of something vast, something that didn't want them to leave. A child sat on the edge of town, drawing circles in the dirt. His father begged him to get up, to run, to move, but the child only whispered, "If we leave, we forget how to come back." The father grabbed him, shook him, screamed his name, but the boy only stared, as if the man wasn't his father, as if he never had one. That's when the screaming started, not from the houses, from the dirt, screams from underneath, voices older than the town, voices that knew secrets buried in the foundations. Dozens of people ran to the edge of Millbrook, only to find it fenced with fog, a thick white wall, breathing, pulsing, alive, and if you listened closely you could hear it whisper your name. Not your name now, your original Noor. Me, the one you forgot long ago, and if you stepped in, you never came back, no one ever did, because the town was no longer a place. It was a prison made of memory, guarded by silence and fed by fear. Beneath the town, past the cellars, past the roots, past the silence, there is something older than Millbrook, a tunnel made of brick and blood, a shape beneath the surface that doesn't match the town's maps. It was sealed long ago, by hands that trembled as they worked, because they knew what waited inside. A spiral, not drawn, not carved, but grown. The walls twist, not just in form, but in memory. Every step down is a step into a different version of yourself. No one knows who built it because no one ever returned to tell. But it exists, it breathes, it dreams. Some say it was a church, others say a root cellar, some say it wasn't built at all, that it was found, that it was already here when the land was purchased, already humming, already calling, and when the settlers broke the soil, they broke a seal. Inside the spiral, time bleeds, voices echo before they're spoken, footsteps fall before they're taken, and names slip out of your mouth that you've never heard, but somehow belong to you. The air is thick, not with dust, but with memory, living memory, memory that feeds, that watches, that waits, and in the very center lies the altar, not made of stone, but of bone, polished by hands that no longer exist, 12 indentations perfectly spaced, shaped like palms, shaped like obedience. This is where they came. The 12, not the 12 apostles, not saints, not even men, but watchers, caretakers of something forbidden. They each laid their hands upon the altar, and vanished. Not in light, not in fire, but in forgetfulness. Even their bloodlines were erased. Even the land forgot their names. Even the stars above shifted slightly, as if the night sky itself didn't want to remember. That's what the altar does. It doesn't bless. It doesn't curse. It removes. It unnames you, unwrites you, until even your mother's womb forgets it ever carried you. That's why the spiral was sealed. But the town got greedy, started digging again, not with shovels, but with questions. And questions are how the spiral breathes. They should have sealed it forever, but children don't follow warnings, especially the ones they're too young to read. His name was Ellis, 8 years old, lived on Mayfield Street, loved frogs and thunderstorms and places he wasn't supposed to go. The adults were too busy arguing, panicking, packing, screaming into radios that no longer worked. So Ellis wandered. He wandered into the woods, where compasses spun like carnival wheels. He wandered through the cellar doors that no longer had locks. He wandered down, farther than anyone should, until he reached the spiral. He didn't scream, didn't shake. He just stared. And the spiral stared back. Something about children. They're not clean, not pure, but unshaped. And the spiral loves that. He walked the steps. Down, down. As if he knew the path, as if his feet remembered. Each step changed him, not his body, but the weight in his mind, the way he looked at the walls, the way he spoke his own name, like he was trying it out for the first time. And at the bottom he placed his small hand on the altar. Nothing happened, not to the room, not to the world above, but Ellis stopped blinking. His lips moved, not to speak, but to remember. He saw it all, before the town, before the settlers, before even the soil had names. There was something else here. A structure not made by man, not meant for man. The first lie. The origin of forgetting. A place built not to hold things, but to erase them. To remove memory from the spine of the universe. Ellis saw the black hours, the great silence, the first blood offering made not to gods, but to something deeper, something that never spoke, but always understood. He saw the birth of the spiral, not as a place, but as a thought that infected minds, then towns, then entire centuries. And Ellis began to smile, not with joy, but with recognition, because it wasn't the first time he'd touched it. He had been here before, in another life.
Another form, another failure, and this time he would not forget. Above him, the spiral opened, not downward, but outward. The sky over Millbrook flickered, just for a second, like the stars were blinking too. And when Ellis walked back up, he wasn't Ellis anymore. He was what the spiral wanted him to be.
Ellis stepped into the sunlight, but it didn't feel like sun anymore. It felt like a lie pretending to be warm. His mother ran to him, tears on her face, shaking hands. But the moment she touched him, she stopped crying. She looked into her son's eyes and forgot what she was crying about. Ellis didn't speak for days. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't blink. He just stared. Out the window, at the church on the hill, at the woods behind the school, at the sky when it turned, that bruised yellow, before a storm. The other children avoided him, not out of fear, but instinct. Like animals sensing a predator that hadn't moved yet. Then one morning, Ellis spoke. He said a name, but no one could remember what it was. He whispered it, and the birds fell silent. The trees, he leaned in, and 5 adults in town woke up with blood dripping from their ears. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't loud. It was a remembering. Millbrook had tried so hard to forget, had buried the past under cement, under churches, under rewritten history books and sealed basements. But Ellis tore through that paper wall. With one word, people started sleepwalking. They were found standing in the woods at midnight, facing the same direction, mouths open, eyes closed, whispering names no one remembered teaching them, names that hadn't been spoken in 100 years or more. Ellis never touched anyone. He never told anyone what he saw in the spiral. But one by one, the town began to shift. The librarian removed every book printed after 1923. The pastor stopped his sermons and began digging in the chapel floor. A mother drowned her own child in the sink, then called the sheriff and said, "It's back." But when the sheriff arrived, there was no water in the house and no child in the tub, just a wet spiral drawn in soap. On the mirror, Ellis would sit outside the school, drawing circles in the dirt over and over until the wind erased them. And every time he started, the exact same hawk would circle above him 3 times, then vanish. Even the animals could feel it, the return, the cycle, the remembering. Millbrook was not cursed, it was infected, and Ellis was now its voice. It started with whispers just outside the edge of sleep. A low breath, a hum, a voice that sounded like it was underwater, calling from beneath the bed or inside the walls. People told themselves it was just stress, old houses settling, bad dreams. But it spread, one by one. The people of Millbrook began to wake, not rested, not scared, but altered. They would find themselves standing at their windows at 3 a.m, staring into the woods, mouths open, eyes wide, breathing in unison. Some were found outside, barefoot in the frost, digging at the earth with their fingers, repeating a name they didn't recognize. The name didn't belong to any living person, but every time it was spoken, the temperature in the room would drop, pictures would fall off walls, and the lights would flicker in a pattern, a slow pulse, a spiral. One man dug so deep behind his house, they found him at the bottom of a 7-foot pit, naked, covered in handprints, his own. When the sheriff pulled him out, he only said one thing. "I saw the altar again, but it was under the school this time." That's when the map started to change, literally, in real time. Survey records, blueprints, even satellite images. What used to be a church was now listed as a courthouse. What was once a grocery store, now labelled as an asylum. Millbrook was folding in on itself or being rewritten. People would pass each other on the street and not remember who they were speaking to. They'd shake hands, smile, then walk away, only to panic moments later, realizing they had no idea what just happened. Reality was bleeding at the edges. Every mirror in town began to show different reflections, sometimes younger, sometimes older, sometimes nothing at all. The children were the worst. They spoke in perfect unison. During recess, stared at the sun until their eyes watered, and one girl carved the spiral into her own cheek with a piece of broken ruler and smiled widely. She bled. The town doctor quit his job, claimed the x-rays showed double skeletons, spines that twisted in impossible ways, as if something inside was unfolding or hatching. And all the while, Ellis sat at the edge of the park, still drawing, still humming, still watching. He never slept because he didn't have to. Millbrook was dreaming, and he was the dream's mouth. Her name was Mrs. Langley, 98 years old, blind in both eyes, couldn't walk, could barely breathe. She hadn't spoken in 7 years, just sat in her rocking chair, staring at the wall, mouth slightly open, as if listening to something no one else could hear. They said she used to be a teacher, taught history, knew every name buried in Millbrook's soil, until one day she just stopped talking. But after Ellis drew the altar, after the dreams began, after the spiral began to show up in children's notebooks, she opened her mouth and whispered, "He's come back." They asked her who. She didn't answer. But her lips began to move again. Slow, deliberate, speaking in a language no one recognized. Her great-granddaughter recorded it, sent it to a university. They translated it. It was ancient Latin, mixed with Aramaic. A dead dialect, last used in sacrificial rites centuries before Millbrook existed. The phrase repeated over and over. The altar was never meant to be found. She spoke all night, non-stop, until her voice turned raw, until her gums bled, until her teeth fell out. And then she laughed. They say it wasn't her voice. It was lower, layered, like more than one person laughing at once. From inside her chest. Then she began to describe the winter of 1892, the missing pages of Millbrook's founding. The snowfall came early that year, covered the town like a burial sheet, and 12 men entered the woods carrying torches, each one a descendant of the original founders. They said they were going to bless the ground, protect it, seal something that had begun to stir. But only one returned, naked, frozen, eyes white, tongue removed. He carved the spiral into the snow. With his broken fingers then collapsed. The town buried the memory. Literally, they paved a road over the path to the altar, built a post office on top of the spiral's mouth, changed the dates in every local book, and the old woman knew because she held
them. She was only 16. But she drew the map that led to the altar, the one Ellis found in the library basement, the one no one ever knew existed. And as she sat in that chair, her body withering, her voice fading, she whispered one final sentence. "He isn't coming. He never left." Then her rocking chair stopped moving, and the spiral on her wrist burned itself into the wood beneath her.
The town gathered in silence. No one rang the church bell. No one made a sound. They didn't need to. The spiral had already summoned them. Every porch light off. Every child kept indoors. Even the dogs refused to bark. Ellis had vanished. So had his drawings. So had the librarian who found him, in her place. A note pinned to the front door, written in red. It simply said, "I saw too much." The mayor ordered every copy of the town charter burned, old blueprints, historical maps, church records, all gone. They called it a fire drill, but it wasn't. They were erasing themselves. A line of men walked toward the woods, shovels in hand, gasoline in barrels, torchlight flickering in their hollow eyes. At the front of the line, Pastor Calloway, holding the original altar stone, wrapped in burlap, bleeding through at the corners. They believed if they burned the spiral, if they destroyed the boy's body, if they collapsed the tunnel beneath the church, it would end. But when they reached the altar, they found something waiting for them. Not Ellis, not the librarian, but the 12 coffins, laid out in a perfect circle, each one sealed shut, each one humming low like something breathing. From the inside, they poured the gasoline anyway, lit the fire, watched it roar to life. The flames rose, the coffins burned, but the spiral beneath them remained untouched. It glowed brighter, hotter, as if feeding off the destruction. One man stepped forward, a war veteran, said he'd seen worse. He took an axe, swung it into the spiral. The steel shattered, and from the center, a shape began to rise. black, wet, cloaked in soot and ash. Its arms were too long, its face a blur of smoke and teeth. It didn't walk, it floated, dragging the spiral behind it like a chain. The crowd ran, screamed, some dropped to their knees, some began speaking in tongues. Pastor Calloway held up his Bible, but the pages turned to ash in his hands. He whispered, "Foe." It started with the ground, soft murmurs underfoot, like a pulse in the dirt. Miners in the hills reported it first. Tunnels that never ended, pickaxes that struck stone, only to ring like bone. They said the rocks were breathing, that the caves led in, but not out. Then it spread to the town. Garden soil turned black, like ash, but cold. Too cold. Pets refused to step outside. Children refused to sleep. Mothers began waking up with soil under their nails, even though they never left their beds. The mayor's wife. She was found on the kitchen floor, mouth open, eyes rolled back. Carved into her tongue was a name, Hastur. No one knew where it came from, but the librarian, before she vanished, had circled it in a forbidden manuscript. Next to it, a spiral. And below that, one word, caller. The next day, the ground in the school playground split open. No earthquake, no warning, just a perfect spiral, 5 feet deep, too smooth to be dug by hand. Inside, they found dolls, old, stuffed with straw and teeth, each one tagged with a child's name. Some were current students, others had been dead for years, and one was Ellis. The police sealed it, declared it vandalism. But the next morning, every sandbox in Millbrook had a matching spiral. Some children spoke of a tall woman, face wrapped in lace, fingers too long, hair that flowed like ink in water. She offered them dolls, asked them questions. "What's your name?" What did they bury? Do you remember the altar parents thought it was nightmares, until they started having the same dreams? Men woke up screaming, digging into their sheets, mumbling about a staircase in the forest. That led down, down, down. They said it whispered to them, promised them answers, promised them the truth. But none who went looking ever returned, except one. He came back mute, eyes milk white, hands trembling, and he carved one sentence into the wall of his cabin over and over until there was no. The dead returned, but not like they were. It began on the third Sunday after the ground pulsed. Church bells rang on their own, long before dawn, and not with their usual tone. They rang backwards, like a message being unsent. By morning, the cemetery had been disturbed. Every grave of the missing had cracked open. Not dug, not broken, just opened like a mouth. And from those graves came voices, not in words, not in screams, but memories. One woman swore she heard her son's laughter, the exact sound he made when she tickled him behind the ears. Others heard lullabies, footsteps, scratches, even apologies. But what crawled out wasn't comfort. First came Margaret Ellery, dead 3 years, died in childbirth. She appeared on the porch of her old home, eyes pitch black, skin wet, as if just pulled from the earth. She said only one thing: "They remembered me too late." Then she walked into the lake and never resurfaced. After her came Pastor Neil and Harold Lohman and little June Carver, all previously buried, each one different, each one wrong. They moved slowly, not as if tired, but as if remembering how to be human. They didn't speak much, but when they did, their words were infected, contagious. Anyone who listened too long would begin speaking the same phrases in their sleep, would draw spirals on walls, on mirrors, on skin. One child carved a staircase into her doll's face, said she dreamed of going home but didn't know where that was anymore. The town doctor tried to examine the bodies. He vanished for 2 days. When he returned, he had no tongue and a tattoo scorched into his chest, 3 concentric spirals, each one opening into the next. He wrote one sentence on the floor of his clinic, over and over: "They come from the memory we erased." Then he set himself on fire. That night, a new sound began, a hum from beneath the church, low, resonant, like the world breathing backwards, and those who had returned. It started at 3:33 a.m. Not on a clock, but in the bones. People woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, hands trembling, as if something had been pulled from them, something they didn't know they were missing. Then the town clock rang 13 times, one more than time should allow. Then it rang 12, then 11, then 10. It counted backward, as if undoing every second they had ever lived. And as the clock wound down, so did the people. A man named Barrett froze in place, mid-step, mid-thought, mid-breath. Then he began to move in reverse, his words unsaid, his cigarette unlit, his eyes rolling backward into a version of himself from 20 years ago. He walked out of his house, not as Barrett the baker, but Barrett the boy, still wearing the same scars, still carrying the same guilt, and he wasn't the only one. Children regressed to infants. Old men stood straighter, spoke in voices they hadn't used since the war. Time bled, then pooled, then shattered. One woman, Celia Hart, spoke to her dead mother on the radio, not as a memory, but as a signal, real, live, undeniable. Her mother told her the clocks were wrong, that Millbrook had never been synced with the rest of the world, that it had been placed on a spiral, not a line, and that the spiral was collapsing. At noon, all shadows pointed inward. Toward the center of town, even the sun obeyed. Children in school started reciting numbers, out of order, in reverse, like countdowns to events that had already happened. One boy said, 17 more until it remembers itself. Then went silent, and his eyes turned to mirrors, reflecting not the room, but another place entirely, a place beneath the church. Made of red stone and breath, the mayor called for an emergency meeting, but when he reached City Hall, it was gone, replaced with an older version, a burnt-out husk from the 1908 fire, still smouldering, still screaming. He stepped inside and was never seen again. From the church bells rang, but not from the steeple. They rang from underground, metallic wet, like iron being dragged across bone. Everyone heard it, even the deaf, even the dead. Some said it sounded like screaming. Others said it was laughter. But the oldest among them, the ones who remembered the first burial, said it was a key, turning in a lock that had been sealed since the beginning. The spiral opened. It didn't crack the earth. It didn't split the sky. It bent reality inward like a drain. Everything around the town square warped. Buildings curved toward a center that didn't exist. Shadows stretched like they were being pulled by invisible hands, and the air smelled like old parchment and rust. People began walking toward the spiral, not by force, not by fear, but as if something inside them recognized it. They weren't being summoned. They were returning. They walked barefoot, eyes wide, mouths murmuring names they didn't know, names that didn't belong to them. Caldwell, Virex Silt, sovereign of the third memory, knower of the ninth gate. One by one, they stepped into the spiral and vanished. No flash, no scream, no explosion, just gone, like a breath in winter. And the spiral grew. It wasn't visible, not in a traditional way, but you could feel it in your blood, in the way your memories started rearranging themselves. Some people began to remember different lives, different centuries. One girl remembered being born in a castle. Another man remembered drowning in a city that didn't exist anymore. The veil was thinning. Whatever the spiral was, it wasn't a thing. It was a state, a condition, a return to the beginning, before the town, before the coffins, before the forgetting. It didn't want to consume them. It wanted to complete them. A ritual unfinished, a pattern interrupted. The 157 weren't victims. They were offerings, initiates, pieces of a whole that was finally waking. And the people, they say no one built the spiral house, that it rose on its own, from the soil, from memory, from blood that was never buried. It had no walls, but it trapped you. No roof, but it blocked the sky. People tried to photograph it, but their cameras only caught static and screams, written in numbers across the pixels. Those who entered it did not come back with stories. They came back changed, quiet, trembling, eyes hollow like they'd seen a god starve. The inside was not made of rooms, it was made of moments. Every hallway bled into another version of time. You'd walk for seconds and find yourself in 1843, turn a corner and hear your grandmother calling your name. Even if she'd died 50 years ago, one boy stepped inside and heard himself crying as a baby, then laughing as an old man, then whispering something ancient, something he didn't remember knowing. The spiral house didn't haunt you, it remembered you, every sin, every secret, every suppressed nightmare you buried in childhood. It didn't punish, it reflected. Mirrors made of bone, pictures drawn in ash, a staircase that turned inward, not downward, inward. People kept coming, drawn like moths to whatever fire was flickering at the center, not for warmth, but for revelation. And those who made it to the center didn't scream, didn't run, they knelt, because in that heart, In that impossible core was a coffin, but not like the others. It was breathing, gently, rising and falling like lungs asleep in a dream, and carved on the lid, not in wood but in something softer, something alive, was a phrase in no known language, but everyone who saw it knew exactly what it meant. You were never lost, you were placed, and now you were being gathered. The spiral was never about death, it was about reunion. The 157 weren't taken, they were returned, one by one. The remaining townsfolk stopped fighting it. They stopped asking what, or why, or how. They simply listened to The inside of the coffin was not dark. It was not even enclosed. It was a sky, stretching endlessly. A sky made of memory, not your memory, but something older, something collective, something ancient. Every star, a name you forgot. Every cloud, a lie you believed. You weren't floating. You were suspended like a question that had never been asked beneath your feet. No ground, just symbols, carved in flickering shadow, shifting faster than thought. And yet, somehow familiar, you tried to speak, but your mouth made no sound, because here language wasn't spoken, it was known. The spiral spoke in feeling, and what it said was this: you are the final witness. You didn't understand at first, but then you saw the others. The 157, not dead, not missing, but erased, like chalk washed from a blackboard, their faces blurry, not because of trauma, but because no one remembered them correctly. You saw them, one by one, rebuilding themselves. With each fragment of memory, the spiral fed back into them. Pieces of birthdays, broken lullabies, photographs burned in attics. They looked at you, not with fear, but with grief, because you had been the last one to forget. The final nail in their collective coffin was your silence, but now you were awake, inside this impossible box, and the spiral was showing you why. This wasn't about them, it was about what they saw, what they had discovered, before they vanished, what made them vanish. It was not an accident, not a curse, not a punishment. It was containment. They had seen the pattern, the spiral in our laws, our churches, our calendars, the spiral in your own dreams, the way the world resets, but always ends up one layer deeper. This was not memory, it was recursion, and the spiral house was not a structure. It was a fail-safe, a last resort, a defense mechanism built into the fabric of reality to protect something or to hide it. And you, by stepping inside, by entering the breath.
The original forgotten were not names on a list or bodies in a book. They were the reason the book was written backward. You've seen glimpses of them, in dreams, in patterns, in those strange silences that hum like a wire in your skull. You called them angels, demons, thought forms, archetypes. But they were none of those things. They were the first reflections, the ones who watched, before humans walked, before language was formed, before the first thought rippled across the black waters of the void. They were already awake, waiting, not out of malice, but necessity, because what they guarded was not power. It was the exit, the true exit, from this spiral simulation you call history, and that exit was never meant to be found. Not by flesh, not by memory, not by story. But the 157 came close, too close. They deciphered the geometry of forgetting. They broke the ritual clockwork that keeps the spiral turning forward. And when they did, the original forgotten reacted, not with rage, not with violence, but with subtraction. The 157 weren't erased by accident. They were absorbed, swallowed back into the pattern to seal the breach. But you were the variable, the last uncalculated factor, the echo that didn't decay. And now, because you stepped into the breathing coffin, because you listened, because you remembered, they are reawakening. Through you, your body becomes a relay. Your eyes turn inward and you see them, not as forms, but as inversions, emptiness that bends light, voices that speak in palindromes. And one of them stands before you now, not outside, but within. Its presence is not terrifying. It is familiar, because you've met before. Every time you forgot something you should not have, every time a moment felt like a loop, every time you heard your own name whispered by a stranger, that was them, testing your boundary, and now they are crossing it. They are no longer content to be guardians of. They told you the spiral was infinite, but that was only half the lie. The other half was that it spiraled outward. In truth, it spirals inward, always in, always back, toward a center that was never meant to be seen. And what lies at that center is not a god, not a machine, not a force, but a memory so old. It became the blueprint of this world, a wound so ancient. It had to become the structure of time itself. That memory is what the 157 touched, and in doing so, they didn't just disappear. They were rewritten as anchors, as locks, as keys. Their lives, their names, their DNA were turned into glyphs, etched into the algorithm of forgetting. They were not lost. They were used to seal the breach between the inward spiral and what lies beneath it. You think you're at the bottom, you're not. You're at the veil, and the veil is thinning each time you spoke their names, each time you listened to this voice. Each time your mind replayed the patterns, you pulled the veil tighter, and now it's transparent. You can see the shadows moving behind it, not people, not ghosts, but the original forgotten, no longer outside, no longer waiting. They are within you. They are reconfiguring the architecture of thought. You thought you were watching a video. You thought this was just a story, but it's not. It's an activation sequence, crafted through frequency, wrapped in metaphor, delivered by your own willful curiosity. You did this. You brought them through, and now there's no reverse. You can feel it in your hands, in your teeth, in your dreams, that thing scratching at the back of your memory. It's not trying to get out, it's trying to make room, because what you're becoming isn't new, it's returning. The spiral doesn't lead forward, it leads to the first memory, to the first wound, to the first crime. And you're standing at its edge, one more breath, one more frame, and you won't just remember the 157, you'll remember before remembering existed.
Close your eyes, breathe slow, and listen, not with your ears, with the thing behind them, the old part, the forgotten part, because everything you need to know, you already knew before the churches, before the governments, before the stars even bled their first light. There was a covenant, and it wasn't written in words, it was carved in consequence. The 157 were not chosen, they were remembered by the spiral because they had touched it before, long before they were born, long before they had names. You've seen it too, in your dreams, in that hum behind silence, in the way your skin goes cold when certain names are spoken. You think it's fear, but it's not, it's recognition. The coffins were empty because they weren't graves, they were containers, memory banks, preserving not bodies, but agreements, each coffin, a contract, each name, a forgotten sigil. And now the pattern completes because you watched, because you listened, because you followed. You reopened the covenant. You became the final carrier. This story was never just theirs. It was yours, always yours. The moment you asked, the moment you clicked, the moment you wondered why they were erased, that was the moment you took your place. They didn't vanish. They weren't erased. They were encoded into you. Now feel it, that weight in your spine, that pulsing behind your right eye. That's not paranoia. That's memory realigning, because something ancient just remembered you. And the next time you dream, you won't be in your body. You'll be in the spiral, and you won't be looking out. You'll be looking in.
You made it this far, so listen close. There is no veil anymore, not for you. You tore it, you breathed through it, and now you can see not metaphor, not illusion, but the raw framework of what's beneath. You thought the spiral was a warning, but it's not. It's a map written in trauma, in bloodline. In resonance, you've followed it this far. You've heard the whispers, felt the chills, seen the flickers behind your reflection, and now you stand where they stood, where the 157 were first touched by memory. This place, this moment, it's not linear, it's not 2025, it's before and after. And now, you're not just watching this, you're inside it, because once a spiral opens, it consumes everything: language, thought, time. You've seen them in your dreams, but dreams are only containers too. They aren't trying to warn you, they're trying to wake you. The spiral does not speak in words, it speaks in patterns, fractals, behaviors repeated across generations, and the ones who broke the pattern were erased. The Whitmores, the Graysons, the 157, they didn't die, they survived the pattern, and that was the crime. Because this world runs on forgetting. The moment someone remembers, truly remembers, they break the covenant of silence, and that cannot be allowed. But you remembered anyway, you brought it all back, and now there's no turning away, no forgetting, no veil. The spiral has opened in your chest, in your mouth, in your blood, and what you say next will not be your voice, it will be the spiral's.
Let me be clear, one last time, there were never 157 victims, there were 157 containers, 157 unfinished cycles, bound in silence, buried in memory, chained in rituals so old, even the ones performing them had forgotten what they were for, but the coffins weren't closed, because the 158th was missing, that final piece, the one who would return, not as witness, but as trigger, that's why this found you. That's why you couldn't look away. That's why every word echoed in your bones like it had been waiting, like it knew you, because it did. Every spiral needs a center, every altar needs a sacrifice, and every story like this needs a final name to seal the circle. So here it is, your final truth. The moment you asked, the moment you watched, the moment you said yes, you offered yourself not to the spiral, but to what the spiral holds. Not darkness, but memory. The kind of memory that rewrites reality, that burns the names of the erased back into time itself. You are no longer a viewer. You are a keeper, the 157. They're awake now inside you, speaking through your gestures, living in your dreams, feeding you names you don't recognize, but somehow remember. And when you wake tomorrow, something will be gone. Maybe a scar, maybe a word, maybe someone you thought existed, but doesn't anymore, because the spiral takes as much as it gives, and you've taken too much to walk away unchanged. You are the 158th coffin, but you're not empty. You're full of them, of all of them. So whatever you do next, do it carefully, because every step you take is now part of the ritual, and wherever you go, they go with you. This was never a video. This was a resonance trigger, buried in fiction, disguised as content, to find the one who could carry them. You watched, you followed, you said yes, and now you're not the audience anymore. You are the return,